Well, Keith, thank you so much for being on the show today. Looking forward to talking about your story in both professional and especially collegiate baseball as a coach and a manager. We'll start with this. You signed a pro baseball contract at 17 years old. I'm curious if you feel comfortable giving us the timeline of when that happened. What was it like for you, and how did your professional? Let's start with that. What was that like for you? Especially, I'm sure professional baseball has evolved quite a bit since then. I don't know how normal it was back when you were 17 to sign a contract, but let's start there.
Yeah, actually, it was more normal back then. This was in
Okay.
1969. So I was a young senior graduating at 17. So that was a little bit unusual. But there were a lot of 18-year-olds signing at that time. I would say that 80 to 85% of the professional baseball signees were right out of high school back in those days
Okay.
because college baseball wasn't as big and as good as it is now.
Okay.
So yeah, so I got a break. I didn't get drafted. Actually, a pro scout saw me after the draft, and I was pitching an American Legion game down in Paducah, and it's a phenomenal story because I had never met a college coach. I had never met a pro scout until that night. And within a week, he was in our house trying to talk my mom and dad into letting me sign this professional baseball contract with the Montreal Expos. So it was really exciting because, as you can imagine, from the time I started playing catch with my brother at probably 5 years old, that was my dream is to get to play
Mm.
either college basketball for Kentucky, because every kid growing up in Kentucky wants to do that almost, or playing Major League Baseball. Those were my two big goals.
So, at this point, when this agent shows up, I mean, I guess you had no one really coming and scouting and seeing you. Like, what were you think? What were your plans? Like the day before this agent shows up at one of your games, what were you thinking your future's going to look like?
Well, my plans, if you have a few minutes, which I think we do since it's a
Yeah,
podcast, I'll tell you the story.
please do.
It was after my senior year, and I'm playing American Legion baseball in Bowling Green, and I asked my Legion coach to help me to get a chance to play college baseball, and he was checking around. One of the best programs in this part of the country back in those days was Murray State University down in the far southwestern part of the state of Kentucky. So Johnny Reagan was a well-known coach back then, and my Legion coach called him and he said, "Hey, I've got a young right-hander. He's from a really small town. He hasn't received any exposure at all. Would you come over and watch him pitch?" And he said he would. So we were in Paducah, Kentucky, which was only 30 miles from Murray State, and I was supposed to start on a Saturday night, but we blew an 8-run lead on Friday night. And so my Legion coach says, "Hey, Madison, get loose." So I'm hustling down to the bullpen to get loose. I'm thinking, what's going on? I'm supposed to start tomorrow night, and Coach Reagan's not going to get to see me pitch, and I'm not going to get seen. So I was a little bit upset about that, but at the same time, it was a competitive situation. So by the time I come into the game, the score was tied. It was the bottom of the ninth, and the bases were loaded, and there were no outs. So there
Uh-huh.
was a lot of ways I could lose that game. If I give up a fly ball,
Right.
they're going to tag and score. If I give up a ground ball, there's a possibility of scoring. There's so many ways to score with the man on third base and no one out. So the first pitch I threw, Dylan, was right at the hitter's head. I threw hard, but I was a little wild. And this guy ducked. It was one of those knockdown pitches where his butt was kind of hitting the ground
Mm.
and his bat was up in the air and the ball actually hit the bat. This
That's
is
great.
a true story. So foul ball, strike one. I ended up striking that guy out. I struck out the next two guys. We go into extra innings, and I actually struck out 9 guys in a row. It was the
Oh man.
best night I'd ever had in my life. I was really throwing hard, and we won the game. And so after the game, I go over and my Legion coach, Mike Cobb, congratulated me. And he said, "I know you're probably upset because you were supposed to start tomorrow night, and obviously now you can't." And I said, "Well, yeah, it was a big opportunity for me." He said, "Well, there's two guys over by our dugout that want to meet you. One of them was a scout for the Detroit Tigers. The other was a scout for the Montreal Expos." So I was so fired up because I couldn't imagine a scout wanting to talk to me.
Yeah.
So I filled out these little cards. This was way before cell phones. And I remember we were going out to eat, and I went to a payphone and called my dad, collect, and said, Dad, you're not going to believe this, but I met 2 pro scouts tonight. And to make a long story just a little longer, the Expo scouts showed up at our house by appointment about a week later, and we had a great visit. And I'm just so excited that he wants to offer me this contract. It was a free agent contract, and they were willing to pay for my education and start me off in rookie ball. Otherwise, my dad would not have let me sign it because he wanted me to get that college degree. So, yeah, it worked out. So I was so young, Dylan, that, and it was so late in the summer, it was like the beginning of July. So the Expos wisely said, hey, you're young, and, there's not much left of the rookie season. So why don't you just go to college for a full year, get a little maturity, come back, and we'll start you in rookie ball after your freshman year in college. So that's what happened. I started in a rookie league called the Gulf Coast League down in Florida, and got bumped up to Watertown, South Dakota in the Northern League. The next year, I went to my first spring training. Did not have a good spring at all. I was sort of in awe of all the great athletes around there, to be honest with you. But this one manager believed in me, and he saw something in me, and he said, "Hey, you're going with me this summer." And I went back to Watertown, South Dakota, and within 2 weeks, no, that's not right. In 4 weeks, I was moved all the way from Class A ball to AAA at 19 years old.
Wow.
So it was a quick and rapid rise.
Yeah.
But, like a lot of stories you've heard, an arm injury here, and then it didn't work out. I didn't make it to the big leagues, but I got really close.
So again, for those not familiar, AAA, the highest minor league before Major League. What was that like for you when your career kind of ended? I'm guessing injury related. Like, what were you thinking?
It was devastating. I was absolutely heartbroken. I didn't have a plan B. I had this plan A of making it to the big leagues, and I was well on my way. But I remember being home for about a week, and I was so down. And my dad had to get up really early to go to work, so my mother would sometimes retreat to another bedroom and read and that sort of thing. So it was really late one night, and I remember knocking on her door, and she said, "Come on in." And boy, this was so unlike me, but I just started crying. I said, "Mom, I'm 19 years old, and I'm a has-been, and I don't know what to do." And like all good mothers, she said, "Well, we'll pray about this, and I know God's got a plan for you." So I decided a few days later, hey, I knew this Red Scout. I had met him because he was a local guy after I signed with the Expos. And I called him up and I said, Mr. Doty, I'm 19 years old, and I had an elbow injury with the Expos in AAA. And he said, "Hey, we know all about you. Our scouts saw you pitch in AAA last year." And I said, I'd love for you to watch me throw to see if you think that I could sign with the Reds. And so this is sort of like one of those old baseball movies you see, but he said, "Meet me at Bowling Green High School baseball field." So I met him there. He opens up his trunk, pulls out a bucket of baseballs, and I had my glove, and he had a catcher's mitt, and he actually said, "Hey, get on the mound, let's start throwing." So he actually caught me, and I warmed up pretty fast that day, and started throwing pretty good. And as soon as we got through throwing, he says, "Hey, I'm not, the Reds aren't in a position to give you a bonus, but we're going to give you a chance. We'll sign you and start you off back at Class A and see if you can work your way back up to AAA." So I got another chance with the Reds. And then made it back to AAA, actually signed a AAA contract with the Reds, and it took me about 2.5 years. And I was playing basketball in the off season at Diddle Arena at Western Kentucky University. Came down with a rebound and stepped on a guy's ankle and actually tore my ACL in my left knee.
Oh, jeez.
And back in 1974, that was basically a career-ending injury because they didn't have the surgical techniques and
Yeah.
and all that. So that's my brief and mediocre career in professional baseball.
Wow. So that's pretty devastating to do it twice, have injuries cut you short.
Yeah.
And then, so how did you go from that to starting your coaching career?
Yeah, I just missed baseball, and I remember finishing up college, and after I got released from the Reds, it wasn't quite as devastating as it was before because I had met my wife Sharon, and we were engaged and actually got married in my last year with the Cincinnati Reds organization, and so I had a future. I had something to look forward to. So we both graduated from Western Kentucky University and decided on teaching careers. And I thought, hey, I want to coach baseball. I know more about baseball than anything else. So why not do that? And so we both got jobs in the Polk County, Florida school system. That's where Winter Haven, Lakeland, Lake Wales, those communities are. And started my baseball career there, and or my coaching career there. And then a year later, I got this opportunity to be a graduate assistant under a legendary baseball coach by the name of Ron Polk at Mississippi State University. And then a year later, the Kentucky job comes open, and somehow God had his hand on that, I know, because who would hire a 26-year-old guy with no head college coaching experience in an SEC school? But it worked out. And so then I stayed at Kentucky for 25 years and just had a blast coaching those young men.
So when you're a teacher, you start coaching, locally high school baseball. What was your dream? Did you have I'm just going to do this forever? Did you have aspirations for college or MLB or minor league?
I really didn't, Dylan. It was interesting. I actually, especially the first year, I was like an assistant basketball coach, assistant baseball coach for that school, which was perfect for me because I'd played baseball and I knew the game, but I'd never coached, and I needed to sort of be mentored and learn how to coach the game. But I fell in love with those high school players. I mean, they had this energy, and they were always trying to get me to go fishing with them. And I was young, and so they just wanted to hang out with me. It was really, really cool. And so when I got this opportunity at Mississippi State, it was tough to leave those guys because they were a young team. I had a lot of guys coming back. But I thought, there's a reason I wasn't really walking that closely with the Lord then, but there was a reason I knew in my heart that this opportunity was coming available. And I knew that, looking in the rearview mirror, I see that God had this plan for me, just like my mom had told me that night when I was 19 years old. So I went with it, and so Sharon and I moved to Starkville, Mississippi, which at that time was not the garden spot of the world, but it was a great baseball program and a great opportunity.
Yeah. So how does Kentucky Division I college baseball school hire a 26-year-old?
Wow, that's another interesting story. So when I was at Mississippi State as a graduate assistant, one of my teammates from the Expos organization was coaching at a junior college in Southern Illinois, and he was going to go into professional baseball scouting. So he called me up and he said, hey, this job's going to be open. Why don't you apply for it? And I did, and I sent my resume in, and he put in a good word for me, and the athletic director called me and said, hey, can you be here in Illinois at this particular date? And I said, absolutely. So Southern Illinois is really not all that far from where I grew up in Western Kentucky. So Sharon and I went up to stay with my mother and father, and then the next day we were going to travel over to Illinois. So we drove over there, got the interview going, and it went really well. They had just built a brand new baseball field. I was excited. I was going to go from coaching high school baseball to a junior college, which was a move up. And they offered the job to me. And on the drive back, we're driving through Southern Illinois, and I said, Sharon, this is so exciting. I can't believe I'm going to get this job. And she said, you mean you like it here? And I said, yeah, it's great. They got a brand new field. And she looked around, and we were driving down this highway, and she said, there's nothing here but corn. And so she had moved to Starkville, Mississippi with me. And now, she was finally saying, hey, I'm not sure about this. She had just been very easy to get along with and anywhere I wanted to move. So I get back to my mother and father's house, and Coach Polk at Mississippi State had told me the Kentucky job was open, and I sent my resume in there just because he encouraged me to do it. Had no idea that I might even get an interview. So I got back to my mom and dad's house, and I told my father, I said, Dad, I'm going to call Cliff Hagan at the University of Kentucky. And Cliff Hagan was this iconic basketball figure. He was a 3-time All-American, just an amazing player back in the, I want to say in the 50s, and led Kentucky to a couple of national championships. And so my dad said, you mean you're calling Cliff Hagan? And I said, yeah, I'm going to call him because they have a job open. I want to see if it's still open. So I got the number some way. I called up there and talked to the secretary, and lo and behold, he took my call.
Wow.
And I said, Mr. Hagan, I'm in Kentucky, and I know the job was open, and if it's still open, I would love to come up and talk to you about coaching at the University of Kentucky. He said, can you be here at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning? And I said, absolutely. So drive up to Lexington and just sort of spent maybe an hour with Mr. Hagan, and he was a huge guy. He was 6'5" and just big. He looked like this big movie star kind of guy. And I remember sitting across the desk from him, and my seat was really low to the ground, and he was this big guy in this high seat. I was looking up at him, and it was pretty intimidating. But when I get back to Mississippi a few days later, the phone's ringing, and it's Cliff Hagan, and he's offering me the job at Kentucky. And it was amazing. I mean, I was beside myself. So we lived in this little apartment in Starkville. So I go into the living room, and I tell Sharon, I said, Sharon, you're not going to believe this. Cliff Hagan just offered me the Kentucky job. And she started crying, and she's not a crier. And I said, what is wrong? This is the incredible opportunity. She said, I'm pregnant. Oh, wow. I found out that I got the Kentucky job and that I'm going to be a father.
Oh my goodness!
In like the same minute, and it was amazing. So anyway, Kentucky had broken the school record for losses the year before, and that was the bad news. And then the good news was everybody's coming back. So I had the same players, but what a great group of guys. We broke the school record for wins in my first year at Kentucky, so we were able to flip it, and that got my college coaching career off to a really good start. That's incredible. A long answer to a short question.
That's awesome, though. So you're there for, what, 25 years?
25 years, yeah.
And again, a lot because of the foundation you built. A 26-year-old could now no longer just interview and get the Kentucky head baseball coach job.
That's exactly right.
So you're there, like I know there's a lot of things going on. 25 years, you're still the winningest coach all time of Kentucky. I think last year they had a really good season, and all those sort of things. What's it like? What's the work schedule like for a collegiate baseball coach? I know maybe it depends on the season, but it's like what does it look like to be a baseball coach in college? Yeah,
it's so much more demanding than most people probably realize, because they look at the season and you play in the spring, you start in February, you finish in May, but you play 55 games in that short time period. So it's a very hectic. Baseball they play more games than any other sport. And then there's also recruiting that goes on in the summer. There's baseball camps in the summer, and then in fall you have a fall practice schedule and recruiting. And I'm not just saying this; it's really true, and it's still true for coaches today. I probably averaged working about 60 hours a week because we unfortunately worked on the weekends, and most of the recruiting and the big games are played on the weekends. And then when we got lights at our stadium, I thought that was a great thing. But I would go into the office at 7:30 in the morning and we'd play a game. I'd get home at 11:30 at night. So that's a long day. But I absolutely loved it, Dylan. It was a great experience. I loved working with young men, and I loved seeing them develop and watch them grow from, just coming out of high school to becoming a man and also improving their skills. And that was a joy for me.
Yeah. So you coached from 1976 2003, long career, successful. Did a lot of good stuff in Kentucky. 737 wins, which is a lot. What caused you to eventually step away?
Well, we had a great year in the year 2000, and then we had some down years we had a pretty good year in '01, but then down years in '02 and '03, and I was struggling, but I was so competitive. There's no way I'm going to quit. I'm going to fight through this, and we're going to get back to the regionals and all that. And I was 51 years old. And I remember being in the dugout, and we're playing against Kent State University in what we call a midweek game. You play the conference games on the weekend, and then you play a game or two in the middle of the week. And I remember playing really well that day. We're pitchers throwing strikes, our hitters are getting timely hits, and I'm saying, hey, this it's about the middle of March, and I'm thinking, hey, we're turning this thing around right here. We're going to get it done. And so I've got all these positive thoughts going, and then suddenly God spoke to my heart, and it wasn't audible or anything like that, but it was real. And I very seldom had ever had this really strong impression that this was God talking to me. And he said to me, "This is your last year coaching." Just that was it. Boom. And I thought, man, I'm in the middle of a baseball game, and I sense this. I sense the Spirit of God's telling me this is my last year coaching. And I tried to be honest with you, I tried to get it out of my mind because I didn't want to quit. I didn't want to get out. And so we won that day. The next day we played the same team. We played really well and won again. And I'm thinking, maybe I was sort of like Ebenezer Scrooge. Maybe that was some bad beef or something, indigestion. But Friday night we played Arkansas, and they were ranked in the top 10, and they absolutely hammered us. It was a brutal defeat, and it was so discouraging. And I remember waking up on Saturday morning, and I said, Sharon, God spoke to my heart this past week, and he said, this is my last year of coaching. And I thought she would try to talk me out of it. Hey, get through this season. We'll pray about it. Yeah. We'll see what's going on. But instead she said, yes, this is what I've been waiting for. Oh, wow. And so that was one affirmation. And then my brother came over. He was up from Chattanooga, and he came over to the house, and we were having some coffee. And I told him, I said, Tom, I think God was really speaking to my heart. He wants me to get out of coaching. And he traveled all over the South watching us play baseball. He loved it. And he said, hey, I think that's great. For the first time in your life, you and Sharon are going to be able to do what you want to do anytime you want to do it. And that was the second affirmation. And then I talked to an assistant athletic director who I was really close to. And he said the same thing. He said, if you really feel like God is speaking to you, you need to follow that. So I announced to, first of all, my assistant coaches, and then I met with my team and told them, and I called our athletic director, who was a brand new athletic director, Mitch Barnhart, and he was really surprised, and he's a believer, and he prayed with me and asked God to give me wisdom and for the direction of my life, and so we didn't have a great year, but we won the last game that I coached at Florida. I had a second baseman about 5'8", about 160 pounds, hit a 3-run homer in the top of the 8th inning to win that game for us. So Florida was always our nemesis. They were a great program, and we had trouble with them. So going out on that note was good. But I remember at the last home game, the president of our university came up to me and said, "Keith, you're 51 years old,
Yeah.
and what are you doing?" I said, "Well," and I didn't know whether he would understand this or not. I said, "I really feel like God's leading me out of coaching." And he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know, but I'm waiting to receive some wisdom on that." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what, we want you to stay at the university. Why don't you meet me in my office?" And he gave me the date and time, and I went in, and he wanted me to work in the development office to help raise funds for Eastern Kentucky first generation college students. It was a program called the Robinson Scholars Program, and that was something that thought was really neat. So I did that for a year, but I knew that's not what God wanted me to do. And then I went on a mission trip, Dylan. It was the first mission trip I ever went on. It was in 2004, and I'd been donating used baseball equipment to this organization called Score International because they would go to the Dominican Republic and do baseball clinics and share their faith with young Dominican baseball players. So I thought that was pretty cool. I could give this equipment to people that really needed it. So the guy that I gave the equipment to called me up and he said, "Hey, you're not coaching anymore. You need to go with us in November." And I said, I've never been on a mission trip. I don't know if that's my thing." And he said, "Hey, you need to go." And so I went down there, and I actually tried to back out of it about 2 days before I went. I told my wife, I said, "I'm going to get bitten by some bug I've never seen before. I'm going to get attacked by a tarantula. I don't know what's going to happen." But so she said, "No, you've given your word. You're going. You're not getting out of this." So she sort of put her foot down, and so I went. First day on the baseball field down there, we would put on these free baseball clinics for these kids, and they absolutely love baseball in this country. They walk from all these different villages and come in for our clinic. And then at the end of the clinic, we share the gospel with the kids down there. And I remember thinking, "Hey, this is it. This is what I need to do." And so about a year later, I was down there on another mission trip, and the founder and CEO of the ministry offered me a position. He said, "We need a real baseball guy to bring more baseball coaches and more baseball players to the Dominican Republic, and I think you're the guy." So Sharon and I prayed about that and started working for Score International and taking baseball teams, coaches on trips. It was really, really rewarding. And it's easy to see that's why God called me out of coaching.
Yeah. So you're doing this Score National thing, and what was there? I mean, 51 though, as many people have said to you, was there ever this like itch to go back to collegiate baseball coaching?
Not really. You know, it was. I miss the players. I miss the relationships. Like I said earlier, helping guys get better, watching them grow into men. I miss that aspect of it. But I was this fierce competitor, and I was afraid I would miss the competition.
Yeah.
But to be honest with you, Dylan, I didn't miss it. And I was so into what I was doing with Score that I just poured everything into that. And I still love baseball. Actually, I'm the color commentator on the radio broadcast for the Kentucky Wildcat baseball games now, and to see them go to Omaha last year was incredible, and I got to help call the game, and I'm still connected with the program. Actually, Coach Nick Mingione, the head coach, I've been leading a Bible study that he brings his staff to every week for 9 years now. So I feel like I'm still connected to the baseball program in a really special way.
Yeah, I feel like that's somewhat unique to have somebody who's leading a program in any sport for 25 years and is still the same town, still there, still super connected. I'm curious though. I mean, you talked about the Bible study, you missing the players. What was it like with your faith in these players, in the school? Like, how did that impact your interaction with them as a coach? I know there's probably this of you want to love them well, but also like I don't know, you don't want to get in trouble saying something you're not supposed to say, or someone reporting you or whatever. So how did your faith impact your relationship with the players, and what did it look like for you?
Yeah, there's a quote that I saw not too long ago. I actually put it in a book that I've written. It was written. This quote was said by Rick, I think it's Charlesworth. Rick Charlesworth. He was a rugby coach in Australia, and he said coaching is about coaching the troubled, or no, it's about making the troubled comfortable and troubling those who are too comfortable. And so you have to read players and know, which ones need some support,
Yeah.
which player needs an arm around them, and which one needs to have a wake up call. And all, I mean, you've been a college student, I've been a college student. College students need wake up calls sometimes, but it was phenomenal. When I first started coaching Kentucky, I was not as close to the Lord as I was. To be honest with you, I was on the fence. I was one of those guys. If I was around some Christian coaches, I could talk the language, because I'd grown up in church. But when I was around, I'll say unchurched coaches, I could talk their language too, and so I didn't like myself. And then Sharon kept encouraging me, "Hey, we need to really get involved in church." And then we had our two sons, and I knew that I wanted them to grow up in church. And so I made that decision early in my coaching career at Kentucky that I'm putting the flag in the sand right here, and I'm going to follow Christ. I'm not going to just pretend. I'm going to make a stand. And so my players recognized that, and we would have chapels on Sunday. I would invite them all to chapel, and a lot of them would come, and then it helped me, Dylan, to really, and only Jesus can do this. It helped me to have empathy with those guys. Excuse me, and it helped me to not just to see them as an athlete with a number on their back. It helped me to see them as a person, as one of God's children, and it just revolutionized my coaching philosophy.
Yeah,
it made me a better coach.
Yeah, there's probably a lot you could choose from. But maybe one, like, what's one of your more favorite or more memorable memories from your coaching days? Like one of your favorite stories to tell or favorite memories from your time?
Boy, there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
I always think about this one. There was a time in the early 90s when the Southeastern Conference went away from divisions, and there were 10 teams back then, and we were all competing for that championship. And in this particular year, I think LSU was in first place, as they usually were back in those days, and then Mississippi State was second, and then Kentucky, Tennessee, and Auburn and Georgia were all right there competing for that third spot within reach of winning it. And it was such a competitive season. And I remember on this particular weekend, we were going down to play the last place team in the league. And I remember thinking, man, we go down and sweep those guys, and we win all three games, we're going to probably bounce up to second place, and we'll be in the hunt for the championship. So we go down there. Back then we played double headers on Saturday and a single game on Sunday. We got rained out on Saturday, so we were going to play a double header on Sunday. There was a rain delay, so we didn't get started until about 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we lost both games to the last place team. I was devastated and angry, and I remember how quiet that bus ride was on the way back. And this team that we lost to was in the Central Time Zone. We're in the Eastern Time Zone, so that caused us to get back into Lexington about 4 o'clock in the morning. And I remember standing up on the bus and saying, I know some of you guys have 8 o'clock classes this morning. I expect you to be there. I'm going to check classes personally. So I was taking it out on the players. I was so angry. And so I didn't even go home. because we live 15 miles out of town. I thought I'm just going to sleep in the office, and then I was tired, and I just became more angry as the morning progressed. And I checked the classes; they were there, and I created this practice plan for that afternoon. It was going to be the toughest practice I had ever coached. It was going to be relentless. They were going to be absolutely exhausted, and they were going to understand that this is the kind of practice you have when you lose to a team that you shouldn't lose to.
Yeah.
So I had all this pent up anger, and I was just going to hammer these guys. So I pull into the parking lot where our field is, and as I'm getting out of the car, Bill Curry, our football coach at the time, he was getting out of his car for spring football practice. And he said, "Hey, Keith, man, I saw the paper this morning, and I'm so sorry you guys lost." He said, I know how important that series was to you. And then he looked at me and he said, "You look terrible." And I said, "Thanks, coach." And he said, "No." He said, "I tell you, if you look like that when you get out on the practice field, you're going to have the worst practice of the year." He said, "What you need to do is you need to kick yourself in the tail. And you need to go in and take a shower, and you need to go out and have a great practice. You need to show these guys that, hey, we're not done." And he just gave me an attitude check.
Yeah.
So I took his advice. I go in, I take a shower, I put my practice gear on. I go out the field, I completely change my practice plan. Instead of having this 2.5 hour grueling practice, I had about an hour and a half practice. It was very upbeat, very positive, and it went really well. The players were shocked. They thought I was going to kill them. And so the next day I go to practice, and lo and behold, Coach Curry's pulling in the same time I am again. And he gets out and he said, "Man, I was up on the tower yesterday, and I know I'm supposed to be watching our football team practice, but I was watching you guys practice across the fence there." And he said, "You guys had so much energy and looked like guys were having fun." And he said, "That's great." I said, "Coach, you gave me an attitude check. I needed what you told me yesterday." And so we played LSU the next weekend. They're ranked number 1 in the nation, first in the league. We swept them. We won all 3 games against LSU. And I tell that story often at coaching clinics, when I speak at clinics, because we always talk about, hey, this player has this attitude, this one has a negative attitude, and on and on. But coaches, we need to check our attitude as well. Sometimes we get negative attitudes. We get discouraged, and we're supposed to be leading these guys. We can't let that negativity take over the program.
Yeah.
So that's one of my favorite stories, because it to me it speaks volumes about how we need to extend a little bit grace to those we lead. It's easy to point the finger, to blame, but if it's a team, we're all in it together, and we need if we're in a ditch, we need to get out of it together.
Yeah.
So I don't think I'll ever forget that story.
Yeah, that's good. I'm curious, you mentioned riding the bus. Can you speak to what travel is like during the season? What's that like for you guys?
I could speak to some of what travel is like. There's a lot of funny smells and jokes and laughter on a team bus, especially when you're traveling 6 or 7 hours. But you asked me a few minutes ago if I miss coaching. Believe it or not, that's one of the things I miss a little bit. I don't miss the exhaustion of traveling on a bus, but I miss the camaraderie of that's when a lot of players would come up and they'd say, "Hey, coach, you got a minute? I want to talk to you about something." Or they would see me reading a book, and it would usually was like a Christian leadership type book, and they'd say, "Hey, coach, what you reading? Would you mind letting me borrow that when you get through?" And it's when I really connected with a lot of players that I would not have normally connected with, because when you're at practice, you're going through the drills and you're teaching and all that, but it's the times before practice, after practice, on the bus, and in the motel rooms where guys knock on your door. Those are the times that I really connected with the players. But one of the things I remember about the bus rides is when we'd come back if we won a series or if we won a game, the guys would always, as we pulled into the street that took us to the clubhouse, they would sing the fight song. And that was just a cool tradition that our baseball program had, and it just carried on year after year after year.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was fun. It was hard. It was fun. It was a lot of late nights, but good memories.
Yeah. I'm curious too, how did it work? I mean, before cell phones and everything, we talked about like that rain out, the doubleheader, get home at 4 a.m. Like, does your wife just know, like, I don't know, I'll see him at some point? Like, how did you communicate with her if there was a change in schedule?
Yeah, I mean, definitely on that night I didn't communicate with her, and she learned how to just kind of sleep through it. And like if we were coming back from Athens, Georgia, or Auburn, Alabama, or someplace far away, she knew I was going to be coming in early in the morning, so most of the time she wouldn't even wake up. And because she was teaching, she had to work the next
Oh,
day.
yeah. Yeah.
But it was a crazy schedule. We obviously love those home series where we played 3 games at home and didn't have to travel. But so many fun and interesting things happen when you're on the road with 25 college age baseball players.
Yeah. You shared, one of those memorable moments, stories. On the flip side, what would you say is one of the most painful losses or experiences you had as a coach?
The most painful loss was in Connecticut. In New Britain, Connecticut, we were playing in a regional tournament, and Stanford had won the national championship the year before, and we were in the winner's bracket and they were in the loser's bracket, and all we had to do is beat Stanford 1 game, and we're in the College World Series. And they hit. I remember one of their players hit a line drive towards our shortstop, and he jumped as high as he could, and the ball went off the tip of his glove into the outfield, and that was a winning run for Stanford. And they beat us the first game, and then they beat us the second game. That was the most devastating, because I'm thinking, if he catches that ball, if he jumps another inch higher, we're in the College World Series.
Yeah.
And then, but even much, much worse than that, I lost a player one year. It was a strange thing where he was a very good pitcher and was a prospect, and he had allergies all spring, and he was taking things like Sudafed and things to clear up his sinuses, and he just coughed. I remember he just coughed all spring. And then he was going to play at the end of the year. He was going to play in Alaska in a summer league they have up there. And this young man was projected to go in the second or third round of the draft, and just a great athlete. He was an African-American kid from a small town here in Kentucky, Danville, Kentucky. Great young man. So he goes up to Alaska, and he gets more sick. But before he went up there, he started having back spasms. And he's thinking, I can't get on an airplane traveling all the way to Seattle and then to Alaska with back spasms. So he goes to his doctor, and the doctor prescribed a muscle relaxer. So that helped him with the trip. But then when he gets to Alaska, he becomes more and more ill. And finally, after 2 or 3 days, he goes up to his coach up there and says, I've got to go home. I'm sick. And the coach said, hey, we'll check you in a hospital. We'll get you taken care of here. And he said, no, I got to go home. Mm-hmm. So he gets on a plane. He was so sick between Seattle and Atlanta on the way back that they had to lay him in the aisle of the plane. He was just very sick. Nobody could figure out what was wrong with him. Gets to Atlanta, the flight attendants try to get him to go to a hospital there. He says, no, I got to go home. Mm-hmm. Makes it back to Lexington and then down to Danville. And his family sees how sick he is. They take him to the local hospital, and then they send him to the UK Medical Center. So I'm running a baseball camp, and I'm thinking Troy is in Alaska.
Yeah.
All this happened in 24 hours. So I'm sitting there, and I'm near the press box, and the phone rings, and I just pick it up, and it was one of his teammates. He said, Coach, you got to get over to the hospital. Troy is really sick. So I get over there, and his mom and dad and his pastor were there. And when I go into the room, Dylan, there were about 6 doctors around him trying to figure out what was going on with him, and they could not figure it out. And he just kept getting worse. And so finally, the doctors asked us to leave, and so we go up into this little waiting room. And I remember this nurse came up and got Troy's father, and she said, "Mr. Trumbo, Troy wants to see you. He seems like he's really frightened." So Mr. Trumbo goes down to his room, and about 3 or 4 minutes later, I hear this wailing that gives me shivers right now. And I knew that Troy had passed away, and that was his father mourning. So, I had to tell Miss Trumbo, and she just looked at my face and she said, "Troy's gone, isn't he?" And I said, "Yes." And that was the most devastating thing I've ever gone through, because he was such. The only thing I can say about Troy Trumbo, he was a beautiful soul. He was just a great young man, and to see him go that fast. 6 months later, after the autopsies and all that, it took him 6 months to figure out that he had, because of the muscle relaxer and the Sudafed, it did something chemically to his body that only happens to far less than 1% of all the people that take that combination.
Wow.
His body chemistry just reacted negatively to it. It took that long to figure it out. But and then I won't go into all the details, but right after I got out of coaching, one of my former players, I went to his wedding the night before, and the next morning he and his wife went down in an airplane outside of Lexington, and they both were killed in that airplane crash. But you I think if you coach the right way, you love these guys. Mm. And when you see great things happen for them, you celebrate with them. And when tragedy happens, you grieve. And it becomes like a part of your family. And I know that's sort of an overstated thing, but it's so true. When you coach the right way, it's family. So, it's even though I love what I'm doing with Score International right now, and I had a tremendous experience coaching because of the relationships and because of just getting to be around so many great young men.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that's tough. Thank you for sharing the hard stuff. Now, on the flip side, some of the good stuff. You've coached a number of professional baseball players, those who went on to Major League Baseball. What's that like for you when you had a former player, make it all the way to the top?
It was phenomenal. I remember thinking when my first guy I coached made it to the big leagues, I remember the excitement I felt, and I remember thinking this is what it would have felt like if I had made it. I got as excited for them as I would have been for myself. And then, and then over the years, a lot of guys made it up, and it was just a blast to be able to go to Yankee Stadium or Wrigley Field or somewhere and watch your former players compete at that level.
Now, are they buying your tickets?
They give me tickets.
Okay.
They know I can still make them run laps if they don't.
That's right. Yeah. That's got to be cool. So cool to see your investment, in that way. Kind of see them make it all the way out. That's really cool.
No doubt.
So again, you're still doing a lot with Score National. I know you shared briefly about it. Can you share just a little bit more about like what it is, what it looks like these days, and what's going on there?
Yeah, COVID was a blow to us. I mean, we couldn't travel, and that's Score National. They specialize in short-term mission trips for athletic teams, for church groups, and our thing is we want to make the mission trip less of a hassle for groups that go. And so we have translators, we have buses set up, we schedule meals, we do all of that for people going on mission trips. So that just shut down. And so it was difficult. I think a lot of nonprofits went through a tough time. And I mean, churches, every state was different. I know in Kentucky, our governor just shut everything down, and and there were state troopers patrolling parking lots to make sure nobody was gathering. It was really, really terrible. But anyway, we bounced back, and I just got back from a trip a few weeks ago. We had about 90 coaches and businessmen
Wow.
in the Dominican Republic, and we put on free baseball clinics for probably 3,000 kids during that week, and got to share our faith with that many kids. So it's really bounced back and it's going well.
Yeah. You have a favorite? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot, but you have like a favorite memory or story to tell from your time in the Dominican?
Boy, there's a lot of good ones. A few years ago, right before COVID, it might have been the last trip I went on before COVID. We put on this clinic at this little baseball field, and I noticed most of the kids were 13 years old down to probably 8 years old. And I tell people all the time, the kids in the Dominican Republic play travel baseball. They walk from their village to the baseball field and play baseball. That's how they travel. But so we had probably 150 kids, something like that, at this particular clinic. And after it was over, we had them all in the bleachers, and I'm sharing my faith with them, and I'm giving them the gospel presentation, and I did something I've never done before. Instead of asking them to asking them to receive Christ in a more private way, I said, Christ, he really took a stand for us, so we need to take a stand for him. And I said, if you want to follow Jesus, if you want to invite him into your heart, I want you to stand up. And then after you stand up, I want you to walk across the field. And I've got two guys over there. They're going to stay in touch with you, and you can learn more about how to follow Jesus. So when I made that invitation, I know you've been there before. It was like nothing happened for, it seemed like 10 minutes, but it was probably 30 seconds. And finally, this little boy, about 9 years old, just stood up, and he looked me right in the eye, and then he just took off and started walking across the field of these guys. And then after he stood up, then older boys, there must have been, I don't know, 12 or 15 of them. It was really cool. But what I didn't see is behind the bleachers, there was this young man from Jamaica. I don't know how he got to the Dominican Republic. He was 6'11", and he was there at that field to do a tryout, a pro tryout. And I watched him follow these little kids across the field. And I didn't even know he was there, but he was just he told me that he was kind of peeking through the bleachers and listening to what I was saying. And I thought, man, God is so good.
Wow.
He puts us, if we make ourselves available, he puts us at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, that's incredible. So these days, I mean, you're obviously still heavily involved with Score International. You're doing some color commentary for a baseball team, involved with the university. Of all the different things you've got going on, like, what's your favorite thing to do these days?
Wow, my favorite thing to do? My favorite thing to do is to travel with my wife, and Dylan, I have a 2-acre pond or small lake, whatever you want to call it, right behind my house. And we built this house here 40 years ago so that I could fish, because I didn't have time to go on fishing trips. I was too busy. And up until recently, I haven't had time to do that. I enjoy going out there in my little boat and catching bass. I mean, that is a blast for me. I also really love doing the color commentating on the radio. It's fun to talk baseball and to hear from former players and that listen to the game and things like that. So, yeah.
That's really fun. Now, also, speaking of things and doing things, you recently published your first book called Coaching with Purpose. I'm going to ask you about the book, but am I correct in assuming author was probably not something you thought you'd be?
You are exactly right. I never thought I'd do anything like that.
So how did this book come about?
It started with a text message. About 10 years ago, I had a coach, one of my former assistant coach. He was the head coach at Campbell down in North Carolina. And he said, I had recommended some books for him to read, some devotional books. And he said, Coach, are there any books, devotional books about baseball? He said, that would help me to understand better. And it would keep me more connected. And so I recommended some, and he ran out of those, and he sent me a text, and he said, Coach, I'm through reading those. What else you got? I didn't have anything else. So I thought, I want to send him a text message every day and just encourage him. I would send a verse and a really short, like a 3-sentence message and a verse. I mean, and a quote, like a verse and then a message and a quote. So he really enjoyed getting those. And so I started sending them to all my former assistant coaches just to encourage them daily. And then they started calling me and saying, hey, Coach, can you send it to this guy, this guy, this guy? Well, now I have almost 600 people that I'm sending text messages to. It's amazing. And I get up every morning. It's part of my quiet time. And I ask God to give me a message. And and I'm not going to say it's easy all the time, because you know what it's like when you want to give a message. Sometimes you have to work for it. But it's a blast. It's fun to do. So I started thinking, hey, I've done about 1,000 of these little text messages that I call mound visits. I think I'm going to put them in a book. And I started that, and I hired a book coach because I'd never written a book before. And she said, you've got a lot of stories, and I think you should maybe change directions and write a book to coaches using your stories, but also using your faith, maybe trying to help them coach God's way. And so I started thinking about that. So I completely changed directions. And this book, Coaching with Purpose, it's about what we mentioned earlier, having empathy for your players. It's about being very competitive, but also connecting in the right way so that you can get the most out of your players, and not only help them become better baseball players, but help them to become future good husbands, good fathers, good citizens. Coaches have such an opportunity. And I started thinking about this, and I'm sort of a big dreamer. And I started thinking, if every coach in America coached in a way where they loved their players and was still demanding and still getting the best out of them, but really caring about them as people. There's so many kids that play so many different kinds of sports. We could literally change our nation for the better. And so, God helps us sometimes. He uses sports, he uses music, he uses pastors, he uses teachers. He can use anybody if they make themselves available. And so I think coaches would be, because they have so much influence on the people they coach. I think so that was my goal, and it just came out December 2nd. So far it's going well, and I'm excited about it.
Well, Keith, you've had a life well lived. I'm appreciative of your faithful presence in Kentucky, the Dominican. I guess the last question kind of goes with the leadership thing. I mean, you've led and developed a lot of guys over the years. For those coaches, bosses, leaders, parents, teachers, I don't know if you could distill maybe a couple of pieces of wisdom when it comes to leading and developing that you've taken over the years.
Boy, I feel like a hypocrite when I say this, because, when you're a young parent, sometimes you overreact to situations, and I'm sure I was guilty of that. But I would say two things. If you're a parent, you're a boss, you're a coach or a teacher, pray for two things every day: patience and wisdom. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is James 1:5. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given. It's a promise from God. And so not only does he give us wisdom, he says he'll give it. James tells us he'll give it to us generously. And we don't have to be a really, really good guy to gain wisdom. He says he will give it to us without finding fault. So there's really no excuse for any of us not to ask God for wisdom. So I think we have this incredible thing called wisdom that we have access to, because God has promised to give it to us. But very few of us ever ask for it every day. And I know the days that I ask for it, my day goes better. You know, when I spend a little time with God and in prayer and Bible reading and asking Him for things like patience and wisdom, my day goes much better each time. If I'm in a hurry and somehow I miss that, it doesn't go as well.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Keith, thank you so much for your time, for your stories. If you want to check you out online or follow you or get the book, where can they go and learn more?
You can get the book through Amazon, or you can go to my website, coachkeithmadison.com, and it'll tell you how to get the book there. And would love to hear from any of your listeners.
Awesome. And I'll put those in the show notes as well, links to the book, keithmadison.com, kind of see what he's doing. I'll even put Score International if you want to learn more about that and get connected with them.
Dylan, I think I made a mistake. It's coachkeithmadison.com.
coachkeithmadison.com.
Yeah.
All right. Then we'll get there. Awesome. Right. Well, Keith, thank you for your time. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Dylan. I appreciate you letting me be on with you.